Howdy. Welcome to the Breakaway Summer Podcast. We are excited that you are following along with us. Thanks for listening and enjoy the talk.
Well, we're wrapping up the book of Jonah, and something really weird is going to happen in verse 1. Verse 1 said it greatly displeased Jonah, and he became angry. Now, we're going to talk in a minute about what displeased Jonah and made him angry, but what's weird about this text is the fact that we're in a 4-chapter book, and we're here at the 4th chapter, and Jonah's upset. You go, what is he doing? Jonah, this is the last chapter of the book. This is chapter 4 chapters. This is supposed to be the happily ever after chapter. This is supposed to be the ride off into the sunset chapter. There's not supposed to be words like displeased and angry. This is when we're all happy and full of joy. Jonah, what's the matter with you? Haven't you ever been to summer camp? I told you a little about my camp experience. I don't know how yours has been this week. I hope yours has been good. Mine was always kind of weird, all right? Mine, when we got there, everybody the first couple of days of camp lived crazy, all right? Guys were smoking, drinking 40s, wearing ninja outfits, climbing buildings, which sounds fun. It's not when it can kill you. So it was crazy, right? Until Thursday night. And then Thursday night, everybody got saved, right? Because after a long week of little sleep and not very nutritious food, everybody was in an emotionally volatile state. And then we would get to the last night of worship and the band would get everybody dialed up. And then the speaker would get out and just really go for it and get everybody worked up. And by the end of the last worship service, everyone would be crying. And then we would lock pinkies and sway and sing Friends of Friends Forever. And then at my camp, right when we hit that emotional pitch, it was open mic night. And one after another, we would get up in that mic and we would start talking. And I remember one guy would get up and he would just go, I just want everyone to know, I just got saved. And we were like, didn't he get saved last year? And the year before that, actually. And people would be like, just let him do it. He's on a roll. And we'd be like, okay, congratulations. Again, all right, it should only happen once, but this is fine. Right, and on here we go. But for most of us, what we would do is get on the mic and we would make big promises of what we were going to do for God, met with hearty affirmations from the crowd. So we'd get up and say, I just want everyone to know, I'm never going to sin again. And they'd be like, I don't think he is. He's had such a good week at camp. I think sin is over for him completely. Next one would get up and be like, that's what I want to know. I'm going to tell every human on the globe about Christ. And you're like, he is prophesying right now. He is the next Billy Graham, right? And on we would go. Next one would get up. I'm going to stop beating up the freshmen. And we're like, stop the violence, Jesse. Thank you. And we would do it. And yet the reality was many of us knew a week, 2 weeks later, we were going to be wrestling with some of the same issues. And even though we knew that, it struck us as so odd. I remember one year this kid got up there and he grabbed the mic and he said, you know what, guys? I've been coming to this camp for years. And he said, you know what? I'm a Christian. I know I am. And I love Jesus and he's working on my life. And I know he's making me more in his image. And I know that we're moving forward. He says, but I just know when I go home, it's going to be hard. I know I'm going to struggle. And I have hope. I'm not discouraged. I'm not giving up. But I just wanted to let you guys know when I go home, pray for me because I know it's going to be a struggle. And I remember it confused some people. People were like, what is he doing? We're supposed to be on a camp high right now, man. Which is the weirdest thing to say to compare relationship with God to like a bong hit. I've never understood that. And you're like, why are you bringing it down? But here's what's weird about that kid. He stood out as weird at our camp. But he sounds a whole lot like the Bible. Right? Now, I'm one of those people that believes Jonah wrote this, right? How else would we get these stories of what was going down in the fish, right? And so I think Jonah wrote this. And here's the lesson in that. And why I bring this up is because I love reading biographies, but I got discouraged after a couple years reading Christian biographies. Because what would happen is the guy who wrote it really loved the person he was writing the book about. And so he would sort of scrub their life so where they looked perfect. So I'd read about guys in the 1700s in England or in Africa in different places. And basically it would just sound like Jesus, right? Wherever. They would write about the guy and they're like, yeah, he read his Bible for 4 hours every day. And then he floated out of the room, healed a few sick, went and blessed all those who were in jeopardy. And it just sounded like something I couldn't relate to at all. And so I started to switch to autobiographies, ones where people would write about their own life, because often people that really knew Christ talked about the beauties of Christ, but also felt comfortable talking about their struggles, the fact that they still struggle. And what I love about this book is I believe Jonah wrote this, and Jonah is talking about what happened in the last chapter was one of the biggest revivals in the Bible. So he's writing about one of the most incredible ministry experiences of the Bible. And yet as he writes about it, where does he end it? He ends with his struggles, that he is still a person who struggles, right? And I hope that's an encouragement to some of you, because here's the deal. Some of you know you're going to have some struggles when you go home. And can I just encourage you? The Bible agrees with you. Chapter 4s are supposed to be clean, but they're not. And I just hope that encourages some of you tonight. Yes, there's going to be struggle. Paul told other believers, it's through much tribulation we'll enter the kingdom. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. So I hope you get fired up about Jesus tonight. I hope you celebrate and worship him tonight. I want you to be encouraged and full of hope, but it isn't contradictory to be encouraged and full of hope and still have a realistic view of, I hope in him in the midst of a world that's still broken, where there'll still be struggle. And so we get to this passage and Jonah is struggling. After an incredible week of ministry, Jonah has some struggles, right? And you're going to have some too, right? Now, what was Jonah's issue? That first word tips it off to you. It says, but it displeased Jonah. And that but shows you what made Jonah angry. It makes you go backwards. And what you find in the verse right before that is it says, as Nineveh was repenting of their evil deeds, it says, when God saw their deeds, that they turned from their wicked way, God relented concerning the calamity which he had declared he would bring upon them, and he did not do it. So what made Jonah so angry? God's compassion towards lost people, particularly towards the Ninevites. It says God turned away from his anger, and so Jonah turned towards his anger. As he saw God not punish the Ninevites, Jonah became angry. And then he prays in verse 2 to the Lord and says, please, Lord, was this not what I said while I was in my own country? In order to forestall this, I fled to Tarshish, because I knew you're a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, and one who relents concerning the calamity. Therefore now, O Lord, take my life from me, for death is better than life. What's he saying? What we're finding out now is why Jonah ran in the first place. It wasn't out of fear of evangelism. It wasn't because he's not a public speaker. It's because he hated the Ninevites. It's because there's a little bit of racism in Jonah. There's a little bit of nationalism in Jonah. There's some deep sin in Jonah. And he knew God, and he said, God, I knew you were going to forgive him. I knew you were going to bless him. I knew you were going to care about him, and I don't want to be a part of that. And so, God, that's why I ran. I did not want you to bless these people, and so I'm super mad that this happened. That's why I ran in the first place. And God says, do you have good reason to be angry? And what I love about that is we don't get a good answer. We don't get any answer from Jonah. Did you notice that? God asks him, do you do right to be angry? And you don't get an answer. Jonah just kind of and marches out of the city, right? And what you catch from that is, yeah, Jonah thinks he does have a right to be angry. And you go, why? What's going on in Jonah? What does he care that God shows compassion to the Ninevites? What's his problem? Well, I think Jonah has the past and the future in view. Because in the recent past in Jonah's life, the Assyrians had secured tribute from Jonah's people. And when you secure tribute, that means your kingdom rules their kingdom and extracts taxes. But it's not like the government extracts it from us. Like, okay, you work, now you pay taxes. Back then, if my kingdom conquered yours, what I would do is I would come into your town, I'd march into your house and say, I own you. I'd make your king, who represents all of you, kneel at my feet, and you can see Assyrian architecture where they made the king do that, King Jehu. And then I walk into your house, and I just take whatever I want. Hey, I like that, that's mine. I like that, that's mine. And you just have to eat it, right? That's how the Assyrians treated Jonah and his people. And so Jonah looked at that, and he was angry. He didn't like these people. And he knew that some other prophets like Hosea predicted if Israel persists in its sin, God will destroy Israel through the nation of Assyria. So he knew, I hate these Assyrians, and they might be used to judge us. And so he was super mad at these people. It was personal. He didn't want to be part of ministry to them. It would be like if you were in a concentration camp held by the Nazis, and God said, hey, I want you to go preach my forgiveness and grace to some Nazis. You'd have a hard time doing that. Or it'd be like if somebody murdered your husband and God said, hey, I want you to go preach the good news of my love to the guy who murdered your husband. How would you feel about that? Would you want to do that? It would be like God saying, hey, I want you to go talk about my forgiveness and my love to the person who murdered your family members in cold blood while they prayed in a church. Go tell them about the good news of my love for them. You wouldn't want to do that. You'd say, God, I don't want to be a part of that. And that's where Jonah is. I don't want to bless these people, right? And what's interesting about this, if you notice it, Jonah's issue is not doctrinal. It's not that Jonah doesn't understand the text. Jonah quotes the Torah in his description of God. It's a dead-on quote of Moses. This is what God is like. Jonah understands the Bible. He can quote Bible verses. His issue is not doctrinal, it's emotional. God, I want you to love me. I don't want you to love them. God, I want your grace for me. I don't care about your grace for them. God bless me, but I don't give a rip about you blessing them, and I certainly don't want to be a part of it. His struggle is with love. So Jonah's struggling, and his struggle is with love. And let me tell you something. That's your struggle and my struggle too. At the deepest level of all of us, underneath for so many of us, is a struggle with love. The greatest commandment is to love God and to love others. And whatever you're dealing with when you go home, you need to know at the basis of it is it's not a love for God or love of others, it's a love of self. That we tend to be selfish people. If you don't believe me, just answer this question. What gets a stronger emotional response out of you? When your cell phone dies or when you read about people dying overseas, murdered for their faith? Just your honest emotional reaction. Which one gets you to go, man? It's probably your phone, right? What bums you out more? When you don't get the video game you want? Or those kids in Africa don't get the meal they want? What gets a stronger emotional reaction out of you? And I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm just trying to make us be honest. We tend to love us. We tend to love me. And we tend to not so much care about other people. So you may not hate these other people, but we're not necessarily doing much about it. Jonah is still struggling, and we will too. And Jonah's struggle is with love, and ours will be too. But let me tell you something. Though it's a real struggle, it's weird. And some of us, we've experienced the grace of God, but we don't want to be gracious to someone that annoys us, right? We ran from God, and his grace came for us. But we don't want to be kind to someone that sits next to us on the bus. Think about it. You've experienced the forgiveness of God. Do you find it hard to forgive your sister or your brother or your parents? We do. And let me tell you something. That's normal, but it's weird. It's weird for the people who've experienced grace to not show grace. It's weird for the people of Jesus who've experienced forgiveness to not give forgiveness. Those who know grace, show grace. Those who've received grace, extend it. That's the most natural thing. For the people who are the objects of God's compassion, to not show compassion is weird. We need to know that. It's like Superman not acting super. It's weird.
He hasn't had an afternoon nap for years. Well, this is just the biggest day of his life. I don't know how to thank you.
Oh, you just did for that wonderful lunch.
Oh, well, I do like to cook. You'll take some coffee, won't you?
Yes, please.
Oh, decaffeinated, of course.
Right.
Hello? Yes. What? Really? Yeah, he's here. I'll tell him. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye. Superman? That was my friend Betty. There's been an accident on the Old River Bridge. A trailer truck crashed through the barrier rail. It's hanging off the side of the bridge, and the driver's still in the cab. Oh, I'm sorry. I hate to make you rush off.
Well, there's no rush.
But the bridge...
Oh, it's okay. I always get there on time. Come on, let's relax a little. it's unusual finding a good-looking girl like you alone like this.
It's weird, isn't it? Like, what are you doing? You're Superman. Go to the Old River Bridge. Don't creepily hit on the girl. Ugh, right? Like, you have powers beyond those of mortal men. Go use them to save and rescue and redeem. That's the most natural thing for a Superman to do. To have superpowers and use them to be a weirdo is strange. It looks weird. To be recipients of the love of God and not love people passionately is weird. To say that we are the people who've experienced the grace of God, but to be impatient and rude with people at restaurants or at our school is weird. To experience the forgiveness and love of God and then to talk bad about people online is super weird. We all struggle. We all do. And our struggle is with love, I promise you. Love for women means to stop looking at pornography because it degrades them. It's a horrible thing what that industry does to young girls. Vast majority have been raped, and those who haven't are usually lied to get into it. It preys on the ignorance and insecurity of young girls to get them in that industry where they're used, abused, discarded. It's a nightmare, right? True love for women is to not look at pornography. And yet in weak moments, how many in here have said, you know what? I even know that, but I care more about me than them. Love for men means to not use sexuality or display your body to get attention for you, because guys can struggle with lust, but how many people don't care about that? Say, I don't care what they struggle with. I'm going to wear whatever I want. I'm going to say whatever I want. I'm going to do whatever I want, because I love me more than I love them. Love for your parents means forgiving them when they make mistakes. It means honoring them and listening to them. But how many times do we get a little thrill from blowing them off? Because we love us more than we love them, right? Our struggle is with love, and we need to know that. And it's sad, and it's weird, because grace embraced becomes grace extended. And for us to receive grace and not show it is very weird and very sad. Question: what does God do with us? What does God do with a people like this? What's he going to do to Jonah? What does he do? Jonah, come here for a second, buddy. I told him to be nice to people. You're done, son. Amos, you're up, bro. Let's go. Is God going to ditch him? I'm sick of him, dude. I'm so sick of his attitude. He's done. Is that what God does? No. Jonah has the same tendency we all do. It is our tendency to resist and to run from the leadership of God. But it's the tendency of God to chase and intersect our self-destructive behavior. It's our tendency to sin. It's his tendency to show grace. God's not going to give up on Jonah, and he's not going to give up on you or me. Behold the beauty of our God. He's going to keep working with his servant Jonah, and he's going to do it using visual aids. So you see in verse 5, it says, and Jonah went out from the city and sat east of it. There he made a shelter for himself and sat in the shade to see what would happen for the city. You get the impression that Jonah sees God's not going to destroy the city, but he's still kind of hoping God will. So he gets a good vantage point. And he's like, come on, hellfire, brimstone, right? Waiting for destruction to come. And then in verse 6, God goes to work. And it says, the Lord God appointed a plant, and it grew up over Jonah to be a shade over his head to deliver him from discomfort. And Jonah was extremely happy about the plant. So God appoints a plant for Jonah, and Jonah is extremely happy. Now stop at this moment, because for many of us have never felt extreme happiness over a plant. There's maybe one or two of you that are like, ooh, ficus, right? But the most of us don't feel extreme happiness about a plant. Now, if you were out on the beach today in 100-degree weather and it was sweltering, you might have gotten pretty excited about a palm tree or something. If someone brought it out, you'd be like, I freaking love this tree. I'm naming my kid after this tree. Palm, get over here, right? Because you go, this thing is saving me from the heat. Jonah is in Middle East heat. And God appoints a plant, and he's thrilled about the plant. But if you can't touch down about that, just think about it. What this is for Jonah is a creature comfort. It's a thing that comforts Jonah. What's yours? We all have one. We all have things that comfort us, that we like. For some of you, it's your tech. You just love your phone. You love the apps on it. You love your picture. You love your ringtone, right? For some of us, it's your iPad. You got it tricked out. You love it. So when things are hard, time's difficult, you just love to pull it out and go for it, right? Some of us, maybe it's your car. You can be failing school. Your parents are mad at you. Girl broke up with you, but you just get in the car and you crank up the music and you go, let's go crazy, and right? And you just drop it in and go, right? Some of you, you're not a car person. You're like, it's not a car. But it's your outfits. It's the way you dress. You go, you know what? I may not be the best at school. I may not be able to accomplish these things I wanted to accomplish. This may not be going well. But the good news is I look fantastic and way better than the rest of you, right? And you just find some comfort in that. It feels good inside, right? It's a thing that brings Jonah joy. What is that thing for you? Jonah's digging on the plant. It's nice. Verse 7, but God appointed a worm when dawn came the next day, and it attacked the plant and it withered. Interesting note, as Jonah runs in chapter 1, God uses a great storm and a big fish. Now in chapter 4, when Jonah's running again, God uses a little plant and a little worm, because he's got the whole world in his hands, right? He does. And he will employ all of it to teach his beloved children. Isn't that great? He loves Jonah. And he begins to work on Jonah, and he sends a worm, and I love it. He sends the worm to attack the plant, and it does. And here's the irony of this. Like I said, Jonah was written with humor. If you notice, everything responds to God faster than the man of God. Winds blow, seas rage, fish eat and vomit on command. Ninevites repent, plants grow, and God looks at that worm and says, worm, yes, sir, eat that plant, yes, sir, right? And he's going for it. Everybody's responsive to God except the man of God or woman of God. It's meant to look weird. It's strange. Superman being creepy, right? And when the sun came up, God appointed a scorching east wind, and it beat down on Jonah's head, so he became faint, and he begged with all his soul to die, saying, death is better to me than life. He's like, my buddy, the ficus is gone. I got sun on my head. I'm hating the universe, right? And God asks him, do you have good reason to be angry? And Jonah now answers him and says, yes, I have a great reason to be angry, angry even unto death. And now God's got him. And God says, you have compassion on a plant for which you did not work, you didn't cause to grow. It came up overnight and perished overnight. Should I not have compassion on Nineveh, the great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who don't know the difference between their right hand and their left, as well as many animals? God says, you have pity on a plant that a worm destroyed? Should I not have compassion for a city that's being torn apart by its sin? That plant you didn't work for and didn't cause to grow, Jonah. These are people made in my image. This city has 120,000 persons who don't know the difference between their right and left hand. Commentators debate that. They could say it's talking about children. They're little ignorant children. You go, Jonah, if you hate the adults, at least love the kids. Others think it's talking about all the citizens of it, because in the Bible, the way you forgive your enemies is you see them as captives to the devil, because that's what they are. That's what Paul told Timothy. That's how Jesus could forgive men while they're nailing him to the cross. Do you remember what he said? Forgive them, God, because they don't even know what they're doing. They're captives to the devil and can't see. And so some think he's looking at Jonah and going, Jonah, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know how far they've gone. Can you have compassion on them in their ignorant evil? And then I love it where the passage ends. God says, okay, if you can't even have compassion on the people, how about the animals, Jonah? And that's God messing with Jonah. He's like, Jonah, even if you hate the Ninevites, you want me to destroy like the sheep and stuff too? Like this, like you want me to destroy? Bessie, I mean, what? Really, buddy? She got her little sackcloth outfit on from chapter 3? You want me to destroy the puppies, Jonah? And he's trying to make Jonah look silly. So what do we get more excited about? Our computers or our neighbors? Which are you more passionate about? When you see news about the Middle East, God broke my heart about this the other day. I saw a picture, and it was another one of those pictures of Christian men on their knees in orange jumpsuits, and these terrorists with their hoods on and their knives standing over them. And I looked at those terrorists, and I just hated them, man. I'm like, you're so arrogant, murdering these men in the name of God, and you think you're some hero and you're going to saw their head off and put it on YouTube. You make me sick. And I just remember looking at it, and my natural response was, oh, God, destroy them. Destroy them. And then I felt like God spoke in that moment, Ben, do you only see in that man, and I was staring at one of those masked men, do you only see an object of my wrath? Could you not see an Apostle Paul? Because that's what happened to Paul. Paul, who wrote a good percentage of your New Testament. What was he doing when you meet Paul in the book of Acts? He was a religious fanatic, killing Christians in the name of his religion. That's who Paul was, and he was doing it in Damascus, the same area these guys are doing it. And God knocked him over. And rather than destroying him, said, I'm forgiving you and I'm changing you. You're mine. And he took an enemy like Paul, a terrorist, and made him not just an object of God's grace, but a proclaimer of God's grace. And how many of us have been blessed by reading the New Testament and have verses from it printed on the back of our t-shirts? And God said, can you look at that man and only pray for judgment, or can you pray for mercy? Because God's heart is a heart of compassion. Our struggle is with love, and God is the lover of souls. He wants to push us to love the right things. And so as you leave here and you struggle, your struggles will be selfishness. And you just got to know it's a tendency in humanity to resist God. I am Jonah. I am Jonah. Thank you, God, that it is a tendency in you to chase and intersect us, because you're a God of compassion and of grace. God's not going to give up on Jonah. He's not going to give up on you. He wants us to love the right things. And here's the good news about it. When we submit to that, that's when we really start living. So I remember when I was a youth pastor, we had a student in our ministry who loved his truck. And I mean, not just like, I enjoy automobiles and enjoy my truck. It's that he would never stop talking about it. Like no matter what the conversation, he would wing it around to the truck. This enchilada is great. You know what else is great? My rims. All right. And then you were just like, oh my gosh. And he just kept talking about, he was never not talking about the truck. And it got to the point where it became like a spiritual issue. Like it was beginning to distance people from him. It was beginning to produce anger and dissension in the group. Youth group is factioning off all around this guy's vehicle. Lots of hate being stirred up. And I had to come to him and I'm like, hey bro, moratorium on the truck. Just stop. Stop talking about the truck. And he was just like, I just can't truck. All right. And what he would do is he would get jobs, part-time during the school, full-time during the summer, and he would save up money, and he would spend that money on tricking out his truck. So every time he saw it, there was some new chrome, something attached to it, some new speaker booming system on the inside, some new craziness. He was nuts about the truck. And I never really got him past it as a youth pastor. One of my great failures as a ministry is he drove off as a youth pastor in his crazy self-absorbed truck. And I was like, well, we just lost that one. I'm sorry. Okay, go. I apologize, world, because get ready. All right, and off he went. And then I went and was a college minister and saw him at the college because it was the one he went to. And I remember we said, hey, let's hook up and grab lunch. And we grabbed lunch, and I remember he picked me up, and I got in his truck. And instantly, I was struck by the fact that there wasn't massive upgrades in the truck. It looked kind of like the last time I saw it. It looked kind of like a normal truck. And I was like, are you doing okay, buddy? Like, what's going on here? Like, are you depressed? Is there something going on, right? What's happening? And I remember we were driving, and he was like, hey, man. He's like, yeah, I was pretty crazy about the truck. Like, yeah, you know. And he said, I got to college, and he said, I got involved in this ministry, and they started talking about these kids overseas that don't have food, don't have an education, don't have clothes, have no consistency, don't have the gospel. He said, and I figured out for a certain amount of money a month, I could get a kid educated, fed, people sharing the gospel with him. He said, and I just felt like God said, you're saving up this money. Where's it going to go, bro? Your truck, which is really about you. Or is it going to go to kids? And he said, God broke my heart because I had to confess in that moment, I love my truck more than I love these kids. But God was gracious with me. God was kind to me. And he said, I still take care of the truck, but I don't obsess about it. He said, I just committed myself monthly to care for this kid. And then the most interesting thing happened. He went from talking a little sheepishly and a little embarrassed to going, and bro, it is so amazing. He said, because as soon as I started putting my money where that kid is, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop feeling about it. How's he doing? We're writing letters to each other. I'm praying for this kid. I'm praying for his whole nation. And he just goes off, and for several minutes, it's just talking about God moving around the globe and the absolute energy that's coming out of him for getting to be a part of it. And I saw him come alive, right? Not by seeking to save his life, but by losing it. By joining God in his compassion, my friend was becoming alive. God will push us to love the right things because he loves us. And he'll do this with you. Will you let God do it? So Corrie ten Boom was in a Nazi concentration camp. Watched her sister die there. She got out and began to travel and preach about the forgiveness of Jesus. And she was preaching in a room like this. And afterwards, she was down front shaking hands. And the Nazi guard who ran the showers came up to her and asked her, is that forgiveness of Jesus even for me? And she said she didn't want to give it to him. She said she didn't want to say yes. He put his hand out to her, and she didn't want to shake it. But then she realized, if my God, while we were sinners, Christ died for us, if he shows that kind of grace, I have to show grace. Grace embraced becomes grace extended, it does. So she reached out her hand and she told him, God forgives you and I forgive you. And she said, a warmth shot through my body. I was a part of something holy. The grace of God could even crumble an empire like the Nazis. It could. So Elisabeth Elliot wrote a whole book about waiting to marry her husband, and then she finally got to marry him. And they moved off to minister to these people together. And he went and made first contact with this tribe. And after first contact with him, they murdered Jim Elliot. They killed him. Elizabeth and their little baby girl went to work among another tribe. And then someone from that tribe of Aucas made contact with her. And she made a decision that her and her little daughter would move in with the Aucas. And she began to tell them about the grace of God who came to us even while we were sinners. And Christ died for us while we were his enemies. And let me tell you something, that message had weight because they said, you mean just like your husband did? The fact that he gave his life for us and you're still coming to preach forgiveness for us? And the tribe came to Christ. And you can read her book. She just died this year. And you can see pictures of her little girl walking hand in hand with these men that had once been murderers and have now become ministers because of the grace of God flowing powerfully through people like Elizabeth. So I read the news this week about South Carolina. And I don't know if you saw what happened after that young man had marched into that church and killed 9 people. They put up on YouTube a picture of his bond hearing. And at the hearing, they let the family members speak to the perpetrator, this kid. Video's been watched hundreds of thousands of times online already. Article in USA Today said this about it just recently. When Christians are in the news, it's usually because they've done something wrong. They've gotten on the wrong side of a culture war, cheated on their wife or worse, when the world rarely gets to see is the powerful grace that flows from a deep faith predicated on the belief that we're all sinners in need of forgiveness. The family members of those slain at Charleston's Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church bore witness to this central tenet of Christianity last week as the nation gasped in awe. I forgive you, one after another told the stone-faced killer Dylan Roof at his bond hearing. Tweeting about the incredible scene, National Review writer Charles C.W. Cook noted, I am not a Christian, but I must say this is a remarkable advertisement for Christianity. Thankfully, the circumstances requiring forgiveness don't always involve the murder of loved ones, but sometimes they do. And I don't know if you've seen that video. It's powerful to see this man who murdered their family members. And you can see different national pundits debating gun laws and whatever. You can see members and leaders of other religions say what we need to do is kill them right back. And what you saw is these families, and you can listen to them, one after another, get up and say to this young man, you took someone from me. I will never hold them again, but I forgive you. I forgive you. Another young man stood up and said, I forgive you too, and I beg you now, repent and put your faith in Jesus. And I watched on Twitter, scrolled through as a world marvels at a grace like that. Christianity is looking beautiful to people in the world who never gave it the time of day. Why? When Christians display the love of Christ, that's powerful. It's powerful. We all struggle. Our struggles with love. But praise be to God, he is patient with us, and he moves us to move with him and his compassionate work to save. That's what will change the world. That's what he's going to keep doing with us. How did Christianity take over in the early church? It was when the church got on board with the love of God, got over ourselves and moved on with him. In ancient Rome, when people got sick in the ancient cities, plagues would break out. People would begin to die en masse. And so when plagues broke out in a city, you broke out from the city. It didn't matter if it was your family members dying in the city. You'd be like, sorry, Mom, and you were out. There was only one group of people who would stay and care for the sick. It was the Christians. They would say, God came to us when we were spiritually destitute. We will come to you and your sickness in time of need. And it was mind-blowing to the Romans. Back in Rome, little girls were not seen as worth much wealth. They were seen as an absorption of money, so it was a hassle at times to give birth to a little baby girl. So it was legal in ancient Rome to take that little baby girl and just set her body on the street corner. They didn't have abortions, so they would just put the kid out on the edge of the street. And as a little baby, it would die of exposure. Or sometimes men would go around and pick them up so they could sell them in the sex trade. Right? Christians said that's wrong. But Christians didn't just say that's wrong, like blog about it. You Romans are so gross, right? Christians said that's wrong. Those girls have dignity. They matter to God. And so they said, if you won't raise them, we will. And Christians began to pick up these little baby girls. And so if you were to go to a worship service in the early church, let me tell you what would meet you as you walk through the door. It would be the singing of little voices of sweet little girls. Because Christians began to walk with their God. Our God is a God of grace and compassion, and he wants us to be a part of grace and compassion. That is our God, and that's where your life will begin. Last story. I remember when I was in college, we had a group of us that were Christians hanging out, whatever, and I remember there was one particular girl that she came to us, and she said, hey guys, I want to do a car wash. And we said, why? Like, what organization are we doing it for? And she said, no organization. And we said, well, then who would people give the money to? And she would say, we're not taking any money. And so we said, then why are we doing a car wash? And she said, because I want to wash people's cars. And when they ask us why we're doing it, I want to tell them because we're Christians. And Christ came not to be served, but to serve and give his life for many. So we thought today we would give our lives to serve you because he loves you. And we thought, that is so weird. But she really wanted to do it, and she was really passionate about it. But she wasn't like a big vocal leader. She wasn't like, hey guys. She was kind of like, hey guys, I want to do a car wash. I do a car wash for Jesus. And we're like, this is so sad. So a couple of us were like, okay, hey, Everybody, shut up, listen. She wants to do a car wash. No, we're not taking any money. No, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but we're going to do it, okay? Saturday. So she set it all up. She got the hoses. She got permission from Walmart. She got all of it set up. And so on Saturday morning, we all showed up out there in the parking lot of Walmart to do a car wash. And man, it was set up. We were all there. She had organized it. We were breaking into 3 different groups. There was the car wash group that would wash the cars. There was the grill group that was grilling hot dogs and serving beverages to those who had to wait for their cars to be given. And there was the roam around and talk about Jesus group, right, that would tell people stuff. I was on rim duty, right? I'm just washing cars, right? And I'll never forget, I'm out there washing this car. And this guy came up to me and said, hey, man, what organization are you with? And I said, we're not with an organization. And he said, well, then who do I give money to? And I said, we're not taking any money. And he said, then why are you doing this? I said, that's a great question. And I gave him the line. I said, because Christ came not to be served and to serve. And we're just some Christians. And he loved us, so we're going to love other people. That's the most natural thing to do. Grace embraced becomes grace extended. Right? That's what we're doing. And I'll never forget, I said that to him, and he went, no, like that. And I was like, yes, what is... And then he sat down on the curb, and he started crying. And I'm sitting there like, what is going on? Like, I'm not the official talk thing. I'm like the wash his car guy, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And he looked up after a minute, and he said, man... He said, I was on my way to go get drunk. He said, I lost my job. He said, I can't find a job. Nobody's helping me. He said, and I was on my way to a bar to get drunk, Saturday morning. And he said, and I saw you guys and pulled over because I thought, if I bring the car back clean, maybe my wife will be a little less mad. And then he just broke down again weeping. He said, I just can't believe you're doing this. And I got to put my arm around this grown man as a teenager and pray over him and talk to him about the grace of God and the love of God. I got to be a part of something powerful in that moment. And I wouldn't have been there without that girl. I would have been doing my own thing, because it's our tendency to resist God and just do whatever we want. And yet it's God's tendency to chase us, because God has a heart of compassion. And he wants us to be a part of his compassionate work. God is a God of love, and he wants us to be a part of loving other people. So I want to challenge you. What would your youth group be like if you decided tomorrow to love one another, to use your words to build each other up? What would it be like if you stepped out into your city and said, when Jesus entered the world, he entered to be a God of compassion and love and rescue? What would it look like for me to be compassionate to my peers? What would it look like for me to love the people in my house? What would it look like for me to serve my parents? I have college students all the time that come to Christ and they say, what do I do with my parents? They're not Christians. I said, let me tell you what you do. Don't preach the gospel to your parents. It's always weird when it goes up to parents. They think you're judging them, goes crazy, goes sideways really fast. I said, you just go home and you do the dishes and you mow the yard and you clean up your room and you speak kindly to them. And I promise you, they will believe there's a God in heaven when they see that. And you know what? I'm right. And it works. As we join God in his compassion and love for other people, the world changes. The world changes. And I want you to be a part of that. But we all struggle. We do. You're going to struggle with being impatient tomorrow. I promise you. When your youth pastor's like, get up, we got to load the bus. You're going to want to say something like, you, right? It's going to come. And I want to challenge you in that moment to say, God, I am Jonah. I'm on my way to Tarshish. Praise be to God that you're God and you are gracious and you are kind to me. Now, God, let me be on board with your gracious and compassionate work, and you keep in step with him, and you watch what he'll do with a young life or a youth group of those who ride with our compassionate King.